Hey there. So, we're talking sci-fi. I've talked about sci-fi in the past because I like sci-fi. I'm a big sci-fi nerd. And just recently I was recommended on YouTube a video of Star Citizen. Apparently they released like an hour of gameplay of their like single player game that they're working on. I actually attempted to make a video like outlining my thoughts on that video as a whole, but apparently it didn't record any of the audio. So that video will not come out, but I figured I could still talk about it just off the top of my head. It won't have any of the visual cues of the actual video, but who cares? It's just a ramble. Anyway, I personally haven't really followed Star Citizen that much. Obviously, it's been in development for like a really long time, pretty notoriously. But yeah, I don't really have the patience to follow a project that long. I mean, obviously, I'm into sci-fi, and if the game ever does actually come out, I will probably play it just because I do like sci-fi, and the like promise of Star Citizen is pretty cool. I mean, obviously that's why it's been so successful as like a crowdfunding campaign, is just because there are so many people that really want them to succeed. I would consider myself among that group of people that wants them to succeed, but I'm not blinded by like the vision of what it could be. There's a lot of people that seem just like completely disillusioned, or I guess the opposite of that, illusioned into thinking that the game is bound to be great no matter what, and then they'll perfectly encapsulate every single thing that you would want them to. My hopes are not that high. Honestly, I don't really know a whole lot about the single player because I feel like most of the conversation online talks about specifically like the multiplayer component of Star Citizen. So I don't really know much about the single player, but it seems like there's a decent amount of parity between the multiplayer element and the single player element. Yeah, whether or not they'll actually be able to deliver on like the multiplayer side of things is a whole other conversation. I have my doubts, but who knows? But the single player should be more straightforward because it's just a fully encapsulated experience, right? They're not trying to recreate society within a video game. They're just trying to make a narrative experience. Which I was kind of unaware. I guess I suppose it makes sense to some degree that like the single player is vastly different in like presentation than the multiplayer. The multiplayer, like I said, it really does seem like they're just trying to recreate society, which I don't really think is going to work personally, but that's what they're trying to do. But it seems like the single player is attempting to be more of like a movie where it's a much more cinematic experience, which is interesting because I didn't know that. Like I said, all of the discussion I've seen of the game online typically revolves around the multiplayer, and it seems like the multiplayer is attempting to be like this very highly detailed, like almost simulator experience where, you could live a second life in this sci-fi world that they've created. Whereas when I was watching the single player reveal or whatever, it doesn't really feel like that at all. They very frequently, it pulled the player out to like third person, and there were a lot of cutscenes, which I thought was kind of weird because I assumed, like I said, that there would be more of a similarity between the single player and the multiplayer, where like, obviously they're trying to tell some story with the single player. It is an encapsulated experience, like I said, but I still figured that they would have tried to maintain some level of like immersion and realism with the single player, which seems like they're not trying to do that at all. It almost feels like more of like a Call of Duty campaign in that way, which is kind of odd. I was not expecting that at all. As for what I saw, I have to say that it might very well be like one of the worst possible like openings to a game I've ever seen. Now, of course, at the end of it, they revealed that I guess the game is planned for a 2026 release, which this project is notorious for being promised at a certain point and then always being delayed. So who the fuck knows if that's even true? But assuming that that is true, that leaves them plenty of time to change stuff around, although it's hard to say like how much they actually will change. There were a few glitches that were seen in that like hour-ish of gameplay that they showed, so it could be that the next 2 years are just going to be them really trying to optimize the performance, because the performance in certain areas, that was another big thing. I mean, Star Citizen has always had really bad performance, but I had always assumed that had more to do with the networking side of things, where it was just really hard to network a bunch of players in such a vast and detailed world. But this is all single player, so it should all be client side. There shouldn't be any networking issues. And there were moments during the gameplay, and you have to imagine that they're playing this on like top of the line hardware, because why wouldn't they? You know, I mean, they're trying to make the game look as good as it can. They're trying to market it to people, get people hyped up. So they're going to be using, you know, top of the line everything, GPU, CPU, memory, everything, you know. So when the gameplay that they're showing drops to like, I mean, it had to have been like 20 frames per second, maybe even lower at certain parts. It's like, that's rough. That's rough, because I don't have a top of the line computer. So I don't want to, you know, play a game at 20 frames per second. And that's like, if that's best case scenario is 20 frames per second, then like I'm fucked. I'm fucked. So that was pretty disheartening. Of course, 2 years is a long time, so maybe they can optimize it. And obviously, while they are probably playing on like top of the line hardware, they also are probably playing the game at like just ridiculously maxed out settings that the average person probably won't need. Again, just because they're trying to make the game look as like pretty as possible, you know. So who knows, maybe it's a bit of a wash, but that was certainly not great to see. But yeah, there's two different sides of this coin when you look at this hour of gameplay that they've showed us. And I use gameplay in very heavy quotation marks, because of the hour of gameplay that they showed us, I would say probably half of it, if not more, was all cutscenes. So like for very little of it is the player actually in control of the game. And for an incredibly small portion of that even, the player is in a position where they are like doing something of their own volition, rather than a lot of it, you're just sitting in a chair, but we'll get there. So there's two sides of the coin. You have the like gameplay experience, and then you have the narrative, which is the, you know, like the story elements of this experience. Like I said, I wasn't expecting them to do this, but it seems like the campaign is very narratively focused, where it's like more of a movie. So you have those two concepts, and I would say in both regards, this hour of gameplay was quite poor. We'll talk about the gameplay first, because it's the most simple to explain. It was just not a good way to start the game. I feel like, just as in terms of like pure interest, in terms of just like pure joy, in pure like spectacle, it's not really much of anything. So first of all, like I said, of this hour, probably only like 30 minutes, probably less, is actually spent with the player controlling the game. Most of it's just cutscenes. And then of that 30 minutes that you are actually playing, probably half of it or more is spent with you just sitting in a turret shooting at spaceships that fly by. It's just not interesting. I at least not to start the game, you know. Like, this is, you know, you go to school, and in like the 5th grade you learn how to like write a story and like write paragraphs and stuff, and they always tell you, you know, your first paragraph, you got to hook the reader, right? And that's true with like any form of entertainment, books, movies, video games. You got to hook the person that, is enjoying your experience. You don't start the game with something as mundane as, here you go, sit in a seat and shoot at things just flying around. If you want to have a mission in your game where you do that, that's perfectly fine. But you put that like in the middle, once it's already been established like what the game is and that there's other things to do, How many people, when they buy the game, having this expectation that it's like this crazy like space simulator game, how many people are gonna boot it up and then the first hour of the game is literally nothing and they're just gonna be like, all right, fuck this. I guess the only like caveat to that is that in order to do that, they would have had to already have paid for the game. And so like as a company, they've already gotten your money, and assuming that they don't offer any kind of like refunds or anything, then it doesn't matter. But that's just dumb. And there's a really loud truck going by. I think it's a school bus. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, it's just not an interesting way to start the game, in my opinion. I mean, everyone's going to have a slightly different idea of what is considered fun, but I do not consider sitting in a seat and just shooting at things as a bunch of like explosions happen in the background. I just don't consider that fun. If you want to put that in your game later on, that's fine. But I would definitely not recommend starting the game with that. And then even when you get out of the chair in their reveal, I mean, I get it. Most games start you off with like a very basic tutorial, like press C to crouch and press shift to run and stuff like that. And this game is kind of no different, where it runs you through some of those more basic, controls and everything. And that's going to slow down the pacing of your game no matter what, right? So I get that. I understand that that's almost a necessity. I do think that at this point, that probably doesn't need to happen. But if people are going to cling to that, if these developers are going to cling to that, then whatever, it's fine. It doesn't help me, obviously, as someone who's played plenty of games. I know how to do those things, but I understand that there may be people that are playing this game as the first game they've ever played, so whatever. That's fine. But even once you're out of the chair, it's still just incredibly slow. It's still just incredibly, like, there's just nothing going on. Like, there's a lot of spectacle, like visual stuff happening. There's fires and explosions and there's sirens and alarms and things, but it's like it doesn't grab me. I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't grab me. Yeah. I also feel like, okay, so if you were to explain to someone what like Star Citizen is, or at the very least what they are attempting to be, I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say that they are something currently when the game doesn't even really exist. Yes, I know that you can play the like beta version of the multiplayer right now, but it is so far from being feature complete that it is just a tech demo. So whatever. But if you were to try and explain what the vision of the game is, I think most people would say that it's a space simulator game with seamless ground to space transitions. You can fly around, do whatever you want. There are some other games that do stuff like that, like No Man's Sky, for instance. So I guess the big difference between Star Citizen and No Man's Sky is that Star Citizen is attempting to be a very high fidelity game. So if I had to describe Star Citizen in like one sentence, it would be high fidelity, ground to space, seamless transitions, space simulator type game. And that is something that like pretty much only Star Citizen does. There are pretty much no other games that do what Star Citizen is doing in that regard, especially at the fidelity that Star Citizen does it. So why would you not incorporate that like elevator pitch into like the very first moments of your game? Because that's another thing that I walked away from after having watched that hour-long gameplay reveal. It's like, there's nothing about this that like can only happen in Star Citizen, Like the whole like first hour of the game could literally happen in any game. Like Call of Duty could release like a futuristic campaign, and I feel like they have, that look exactly the same as that. Like there was nothing special about this. There was nothing about watching that or like imagining playing it that would have been like mind blowing, which I feel like is the whole like reason why it's taken them so long to even get anywhere with this game, is because they're trying really hard to make it that super unique experience that you can't get anywhere else. So it's really confusing to me as to why they would have chosen to make the first hour of gameplay, the very first thing that the player experiences, they're going to make that as generic as possible. They're going to make it so that it's an experience that you could literally have in any other game. And I feel like there's a lot of ways you could have really improved it, like some subtle changes that could have drastically improved like the presentation and the spectacle of the first moments of gameplay, right? So that's my problems with the gameplay. It just doesn't look interesting. It's not a good start. It's not a good hook. It's not interesting enough. Sorry. But then narratively, the game is also not good. It's just, I don't know who the writer is. It's just not a good way to start a story. It starts off with this massive battle between some alien species that the viewer has no idea what it is, and a group of what appears to be some kind of like United States Navy parallel future tech formation, right? There's a lot of problems narratively with this opener. The first one being, and probably the biggest one being, is why is any of this occurring? This is the very first thing that the viewer is going to see. So they have no idea why humans are fighting this alien race, or why the alien race is fighting these humans. And the viewer also doesn't know the stakes. What is at risk? What do the humans gain if they win? What do the aliens win or gain if they win? What does each side lose if they lose? What are the stakes? Why are we fighting? It's just, I feel like the game expects like way too much from the player in terms of like just accepting what they're seeing blindly and like just going along with it. Like you can't just present to me like these are the bad guys and you have to kill them no matter what. It's like, okay, yeah, if I'm going to play your game, like I'll go along with it. But that's just terrible writing. Like you could make it more interesting. And you should always strive to, because if you can elicit an emotional reaction from the player, that'll always be significantly more impactful than just being like, we did it, we saved the day, we beat these bad aliens that we told you to kill for no reason. It's like, I don't know anything. I know you haven't explained a single thing. On top of that, the like main human leader guy gives this like Independence Day speech to like hype up the troops, which in and of itself is kind of weird. I mean, I know that they do that kind of thing in the military where they try to like hype up the troops before, an operation or whatever. But I imagine that usually happens like decently before the actual battle, whereas his speech happens like literally like a minute before the battle. So, but that's a bit of semantics, it is what it is. I'm not necessarily not okay with the speech itself, but I am absolutely against the timing of the speech because it happens literally right off the bat. First of all, I don't know who any of these characters are. I just don't. Like, obviously, I can make the intuitive realization that, like, this guy is the leader of the faction or whatever, right? Like, he's a high-ranking general or something. I don't know. That much is obvious, but I don't know who he is. I don't know why I should care about him. I don't know if he has any sort of relation to me as a player. Like, I don't know anything. And then he just starts going off giving this speech, and it's like, it's too early. It's too early in the game to be giving like a hugely motivational speech. I get it that like in the context of the game, the humans have been at war with this alien race for a long time, and that this is just one of many battles. So that from the context of the character we're playing as, it makes perfect sense as to why this guy would be giving a speech. But I am not the character. I am me. And I've never seen this motherfucker in my life. Why is he giving a motivational speech to me right now? I don't know who he is. It doesn't have any impact at all. It's like if you were watching Independence Day and, the president gives the Independence Day speech like 5 minutes into the movie. It'd be like, okay, what is going on? I don't care. There's it doesn't make sense. It's out of order. It's pretty clear that they're going for that super motivational Independence Day-esque scenario. It just doesn't land because it's all too rushed. It's all out of order. It doesn't work the way they've done it. During this guy's motivational speech, he attempts to give context to the player as to what is going on and why they're fighting, but it's also basic, and it also just completely neglects the fact that you can't just tell a person something. You can't get a person to care about something just by giving them exposition, right? So in this case, what's better? Telling the player that this alien race is just a barbaric group of assholes that deserve to be killed because if we don't kill them, they'll kill us, or showing them the barbaric actions of this alien group, right? Just show it happening, and then I'll have an emotional connection. If the game, if there was a moment preceding this moment in the game where the player personally witnesses a group of these aliens slaughter an entire village of people, that would be okay, I get it. These things they're just evil, But I've never seen these things in my life. Like I said, the game expects way too much from the player to just automatically care about these things that obviously no person is going to care about, because you just don't know. You can't care about something you don't understand. You just can't. And you can't understand something that you've never seen before. I don't know. It's just poorly written. I'm sorry. And there's also a bunch of other weird moments where it's clear that they're going for a comedic relief type of situation where it's the commanding officers tells everyone radio silence, we're waiting for them to attack or whatever, and then people keep buzzing in hey, what's going on? It's and he keeps telling them we're supposed to be radio silent, and they play that joke 3 times in a row, and it's it's just not that funny, first of all. So your joke has fallen flat, but also it comes at the expense of making this supposedly highly well-oiled machine of a army force, right? It makes them seem like a bunch of bumbling idiots that don't follow orders and shit. It's I don't know. I'm not in the military, obviously, so I don't know how often stuff like that happens where a person is told to keep radio silent and then they buzz in anyway. Mistakes happen, obviously, but the way it's presented in the game doesn't seem like it's just an accident. It's very clearly intended to be a joke where it's he told them to be quiet, but they're not being quiet. It's what are we doing right now? What are we doing? Yeah, it just doesn't land. First of all, like I said, it's just not funny. But then it's just so I'm led to believe that these people are complete amateurs. They have no professionalism whatsoever. I don't know. So that's just weird. I also, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about them having hired these big A-list actors to play parts in the game. I think I would have been more okay with it if they were merely voice actors and the 3D model of the character that they were portraying was just random. It just looked like a random person. But the fact that they're like one-to-one recreated in the game, I feel like it takes me out of it, honestly. I know obviously Star Citizen isn't the first game to have ever done this, but yeah, I don't know that I really like that. Because it's like, oh, I recognize this guy. So I'm not, no longer am I like immersed in the game, like, oh, this is this guy. Like, no, I'm thinking like, oh, that's just Gary Oldman. I don't know. It doesn't feel right. And then there's also this side of it where it's like, this game is crowd-funded, meaning that millions of people have donated money out of their pockets to get the game made, rather than it being, capital investment from like a private source or something. I'm sure there has been some investment like that, but I think a large majority of the money has been crowdfunded from just regular people. So it seems a little like wrong almost for them to have hired all of these actors that are going to end up charging them way more than like a bunch of random people that they could have found that would have done just as good of a job. Like, I get it, these actors are good at what they do, but there are tons and tons of people out there that can act just as well. They just don't have the reputation of these big actors, right? That's the only difference. Anyone can be a great actor. So the idea that like only these people could have done the job is like, no, that's stupid. Obviously, anyone can do it. So the fact that they've decided to like spend a bunch of money getting these actors is like, I don't know, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way when it's like not your money. And it's like, I don't know, if I was someone who had donated thousands of dollars or whatever, it's like, oh, it's good to know that my money was just going towards fulfilling the fantasy of this like CEO that gets to meet all of these like actors. Like, I don't know, there's just a part of me that feels like that's probably the main motivation for having hired these people, rather than getting them because they truly fit the role. They got them simply because it's like, oh, it'd be cool to have Mark Hamill, be in our game. He's Luke Skywalker. It's like, I mean, I get that, but like, could have been anyone. Not to mention the fact that it seems like Mark Hamill's character is going to be playing like one of the like hotshot aces, which is just really funny to me considering he's like 70 years old, and fighter pilots are known for being like the most exclusive group of people in all of the military, basically, because they have to have like very specific, a set of like personal requirements. Like, they have to be physically fit, they have to be a certain height, they have to have a certain reaction time, they have to have perfect vision, stuff like that. It's like, and then you have this like 70-year-old guy. It's like, okay, well, hold on. So it's another one of those things where it's like they did it specifically because it's a sci-fi game and he's a big sci-fi actor. He's Luke Skywalker. But by choosing him, you have innately like you've done that at the expense of the story. Like, the story makes less sense now because you have chosen him. That's just the way it is. Like, when you present to me a fighter pilot that's 70 years old, you leave me with no option but to say like, okay, so this world doesn't make any sense. There's no way a 70-year-old guy can be a fighter pilot. Like, I'm sure there's lots of great 70-year-old pilots out there, but to be a fighter pilot is a completely different like list of requirements. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an asshole. If someone could prove to me that there is right now a 70-year-old fighter pilot in service, still running missions, then I'll take it back. But I highly doubt that that's accurate. Yeah, I guess that pretty much sums up my feelings about what was shown. I mean, like I said, I'm a big fan of sci-fi, and Star Citizen is a very cool idea for a game. No one can ever say that the idea isn't cool. And the presentation of the game is very impressive. The game looks absolutely incredible. Those are the two things that no one can ever deny about Star Citizen. But I have heavy criticisms for the way they've decided to go about like presenting the story of the game. The writing is just not great, and yeah, like I said, I have my doubts about whether or not they'll actually be able to accomplish the things that they're setting out to accomplish, specifically with regards to like the multiplayer aspect of it. But that's a discussion for an entirely different time. But yeah, I just felt like talking about that because, like I said, it showed up on my recommended feed on YouTube, and I was like, hey, I'll give it a watch because I like sci-fi. And then I was like, that's not what I was expecting at all. And so I was like, I should make a video about that because it would make a good ramble. So here we are, and we're at the end. Wow, what an arc. I'm glad you could be here with me to share that with me. Anyway, if you watched it, let me know what you thought. I'd like to talk about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.